Just over a year ago I started this YouTube channel. When I did, I barely even knew tournaments in War Thunder existed. I'd seen the odd news posts about last year's Air Superiority, but that's about it. I had no idea about the consistent weekly tournaments on TSS. No one ever really talks about it in the general player base, so I was pretty happy just making my RB videos and guides. That is until a few months after I made the channel and it started picking up some traction, an odd message popped up in my DMs from one Carlos DB. Long story short, his teammate Zeus had seen one of my videos and they decided to get me into tournaments. Obviously they succeeded. I joined up with the mythical team, then known as Boys in Hell, and was immediately hooked on the 4v4 top tier air format. Since then I've been playing in their B team, which these days is known as Ouroboros. Now about a year and many weekly tournaments later, Air Superiority is upon us again. This small video series will be our journey through the open qualifiers and hopefully winning the whole thing. I'll start by breaking down the format. Major tournaments this year in War Thunder are split into 2 open qualifying tournaments over 2 weekends. 4 teams can qualify from each, making up an 8 teams finals tournament split over the following 2 weekends, all streamed on the official channels on Twitch. I'll put the vehicle lineups and maps on screen. The lineups have some notable exclusions to try and balance it out. Ultimately a meta is always established of course, but some airframes would result in very little variety. As an example, the Rafale is excluded, and if it wasn't you'd probably see 100 matches of Rafale only 4v4. Then the maps are designed with capture points, which won't be familiar to you from playing AirRB random battles. The capture points exist to force people to engage. It can result in the odd cat and mouse style endgame playing for ticket bleed wins, as you'll see in the series, but without them it would result in much more passive early games with people not properly engaging at close range for quite some time, so I see it as the lesser of 2 evils. The qualifier tournament itself is in the double elimination format, so 2 match losses and you're out, then each match is fought on the same map in a best of 5 format. So we showed up to qualifier 1 with high confidence. I've been playing some clips from that one in the background, but it did not go well. We ran into Voyager very early on, who seemed like possibly the favourites given they went on to win the first qualifier, earning themselves first seed in Air Superiority. We managed to claim a round off them, but we struggled to find any rhythm. The first round we probably should have won as well, if not for a combination of mistakes, including an unforced crash from myself, which was all live on the War Thunder stream, much to my joy. As it is, we got knocked down to the losers bracket 3-1, where we shortly came up against ETR. We swiftly went 2-0 up, but then the tournament system suffered technical difficulties and the current round had to be reset and started from scratch the next day. Once again, we struggled for consistency. We traded rounds, but we were always playing catch-up. We managed to bring it back to 2-2, but we mistimed our strategy last game. I got myself out of position as well and died early, leading us to a 3-2 loss and a pretty demoralising early exit from Quali 1. The clips you've seen in the background were the few rounds we won. I did actually want to show you some of the losses from Quali 1, but I was feeling so down after the tournament that I ended up deleting a lot of footage, and given we just had the update, the server replays will no longer work. So we reconvened on the Monday, confidence and morale pretty shattered, but we had to put that behind us quickly. There's 2 open qualifiers after all, so it's not over. We trained and practiced every evening all week, and we showed up the following weekend to Quali 2 determined to make a better showing. Match 1 we were up against a relatively new team, and despite my best efforts to fly into a tree in the very first round, we eased to a 3-0 victory. They were playing a bit too separate and not really exerting any meaningful pressure on us, allowing us to pick them off one by one relatively easily. Not a huge amount to show here, so I'll press on to match 2. We're on Kamchatka this round, which is a relatively small map with the mountain in the middle often making it difficult to track enemy positions. On a side note, I wanted to record and put the server replay minimap in the top corner like I have done in my old weekly tournament videos. But as I mentioned a second ago, as we've had the update, old replays will no longer work, so I wasn't able to get that done in time. So with the time between finishing the tournament and the update coming out, I had to focus my time into collecting the replay footage for my teammates' POVs. We had some slight indecision and miscommunication at the start of this one. We were planning on capturing the C point, but as they had full pushed our own home cap, that would put our D point right next to them and give us quite a difficult capture point advantage to overturn. So instead we opted to continue on to their uncontested home capture point. However, due to this hesitation, we spent some time where they did actually have 2 capture points, both of the home caps, and we developed a ticket disadvantage. And when we did get to their home cap, they've already had time to set up and move back to contest us. At this point, it's important to remain patient despite the ticket disadvantage. We are getting their home cap, so the ticket bleed is going to stop, and there's still 6 minutes on the clock. So it's important I don't over push or get too close to the mountain and get caught out. We know from the contrail and the missile coming from the small mountain, the 2 of them are over there, and obviously there's that Gripen spotted on my left. So I'm going to look to wall off this Gripen as another one pops up firing to the left of the mountain, and I'm basically going to make it my job to defend from these 2. As I do, I'm going to get a missile pop up on my tail, and I'm just going to pause it as I pan my camera around. So this is a great example on notching and decision making. The missile is directly behind and slightly below me. The first rule of a rear aspect Fox 3 launch is you're going to be pulling into them, but the direction I choose is important here. If I notch to my left, I'll potentially give my tail to the Gripen, and I also won't be in a good position to fire on any other threats. If I notch directly to my right, however, I'll be flying head on to any potential missile from the same Gripen. My other options are up or down. By doing so, I'll be notching in both directions if the Gripen does get a missile off. Think of the intersection of the X, Y and Z axis. It's all 90 degrees, remember. Down is going to be the best option here. The missile is slightly below me, so I have less angle to make up compared to going up, and going up will also cause me to be slower. I'll play it through now and watch how I establish the Gripen hasn't actually fired. Because of this, I can dodge the IOG after establishing my notch by pitching into the Gripen eventually. So I turn my defensive maneuver into an offensive maneuver to engage the Gripen. Now watch how when I go for the ER shot here, I don't care that my radar switched to chaff, I just need the lock to fire the missile. I can then relock the Gripen just to re-guide the ER in. That's the advantage. If I fired a Fox 3 there, it'd be unlikely to track off the rail, whereas an ER I can keep commanding it back onto where I want it. Switching to Biscuit's POV in this game now, I always play the flanker in tournaments, so I try to capture some of the Gripen POVs especially to give you an idea of what that looks like. It's a very different gameplay style compared to what you see in the flanker or the Hornet in 4v4. Lots of terrain masking, multi-pathing and ambush style gameplay if the map allows it with the Gripens. You can see how Biscuit's using the terrain to make himself a difficult target to contest, but also constantly firing at people, presenting himself as a threat. This Hornet's been forced low now because their team's collapsing. This allows Biscuit to get an easy kill. Once the Hornet gets low, it becomes very vulnerable because obviously the AMRAMs and the 9Ms don't pull very well off the rail. Biscuit's not even at multipath there, but he doesn't really need to worry because he can outpull anything that's fired at him in the head-on. Now it's just a matter of finishing off the last player on their team. The spectator camera is a bit buggy in War Thunder, so you may see it clip about a bit in the replay footage, so apologies for that. I would have tried to clean it up a bit, but as I mentioned earlier, I was pretty rushed collecting the footage before the update hit. But yeah, back on topic, as this game finishes and we move into Game 2 against GFRIS, I'll talk a bit about team comps in 4v4 at the moment. There's a reasonable amount of variety right now. Typically though, it mainly boils down to 3 airframes, the Gripen, Hornet and Su-27SM, with the occasional J10 and F2 popping up. We were running myself in the flanker, Supreme in the Hornet, and then Sabazis and Biscuit in some combination of Gripen and J10s. I briefly touched on the Gripen's role, which loosely translates to how you play the J10 and F2 as well, which is that of a low altitude brawling type gameplay. The Gripen tends to excel at this due to the incredibly strong flight model, high countermeasure count and very robust damage model. The missile count is low of course, but that's why you have the supporting high altitude airframes as well. That leads me onto the flanker, which you'll be most familiar with from my previous tournament content. Whilst you don't have great range on the R77s, you do with the ERs, so I'll frequently be firing early ERs. Whilst this will only get me a kill if my target makes a mistake, it's a missile that must be respected. Think of it as power projection. The early game BVR is purely to try and establish some kind of map control, with the odd pick being a bonus. The flanker is also very strong in the mid to late game thanks to the off-ball capability of the R77s and the constant combined threat of potential ERs, ETs and R73s. In this round in particular, we've basically looked to push them away from the C point so we can take it, then look to consolidate our position back by our home cap and the new D point. As I look to head back to said capture points, I'll briefly put Supreme's POV bottom left with some long range AMRAM kills. He makes up the 4th player in our comp, specifically in the Swedish Hornet. This is the meta Hornet given its near infinite countermeasures. The Hornet itself is used in 4v4 thanks to the 10 AMRAMs and mentioned countermeasure count. This makes it excellent at exerting consistent pressure throughout the whole match whilst also being incredibly survivable. A good Hornet can have you constantly worrying about launches on the RWR, making it hard to position how you might like. The Hornet and Flanker tend to complement each other, because if the Hornet is able to effectively suppress the enemy team from firing, the Flanker is then able to snipe people with ERs a lot more freely. Once you get good synergy, it can be incredibly strong. Then, as always, the Gripens down low are looking to both prevent the enemy brawlers from getting underneath you, and in turn get underneath the enemy Hornets or Flankers if possible. In this round, an enemy Gripen has already eaten one of Supreme's AMRAMs, and their Flanker also shortly takes another after being shot by a Sabazis and a Gripen down low. This is one of the main threats you face flying up high. If you're defending from BVR missiles, that isn't really an issue, but if a Gripen gets a second launch from an awkward angle a bit closer from below, it becomes much easier to make a mistake. Now it's down to 4v2, so I position a lot more aggressively. The Gripen below is preoccupied with Biscuit, so I can get a top-down R77 that is very difficult to multi-path or defeat. I pick up the crit and he is shortly finished off, and we collapse on their final player in the Hornet. Game 3 of this match, so if we win this one, we're through to the next round. The early game played out the same as last, so I've cut it out. We take the C point and look to contest them as they push to overturn the capture point advantage we have. Straight away I'm going to switch to Supreme's POV and shortly with Sabazis bottom left as well. You can see how as Supreme looks to stop the enemy flanker from pushing us on the right, he strays slightly too far forward over the brawl down below. It does enable him to get a nice top down kill, but he's shortly taken out. Meanwhile, Sabazis takes out an opposing Gripen who fails to get down to multipath, leaving us 3v2. The issue for the enemy team at this point is I find myself high altitude with no pressure. This allows me to loft an ER towards the opposing flanker who's trying to terrain mask over the mountain going cold. I'm able to get it over the peak however, and it has enough energy to collect the kill before Sabazis baits their final player into the vertical to expose them to my R77, giving us a 3-0 win and putting us through to the next round. Game 1 we decided against capping C and pushed through on the opposite side of the mountain towards their home cap, eventually resulting in a fight over said home cap. I'm spending the first phases collecting info on positions here and trying to get some pressure out so they can't form a cohesive push. The danger here is it's easy to overextend playing at altitude. I've started to venture beyond my brawlers below and quite close to their team pushing us. Then one of them also pops up over the mountain, so it's important here I put all my focus on survival. As I start pitching down into a notch though, I'm initially notching with my team, and I see a potential flanking opportunity here. Their player peeking the mountain is coming over to this side of the map, so it seems like there will be a furball that will draw everyone's attention by the home cap, because that's where the other 6 players are. So as they don't appear to be covering me, I can reposition back towards the mountain and create an angle with no pressure on me to get the ER off. So now I go through the usual process with the ER, I fire it off and switch off my lock to switch it to IOG and get rid of RWR warnings. As I see him moving away from the data link, I quickly reconnect just to update the IOG, unlock again and reconnect again. Basically just trying to reduce the amount of RWR warnings and make it as difficult as possible for them to defend the missile. Now switching to Supreme's POV where he's above our brawlers, taking attention and exerting a ton of pressure. He does eventually get taken out, but you see how good the Hornet is with attritional gameplay. He can overload the enemy team with launches and use his countermeasures to drain their resources as well. He picks up 2 kills for his efforts as we switch to Biscuit's POV at the end of game 1 as we take a 1-0 lead. Similar story game 2, both teams capturing their home caps and pushing the other team's cap on opposite sides of the map. In qualifiers you'll notice teams can often play a bit more passive or cautious than in weekly tournaments. It's a simple consequence of the stakes being higher. When there's more to lose, people tend to take less risk. But this can be a dangerous mindset. If you end up too cautious, the opposing team can take advantage. This right here is a good example. As we position above their home cap, it becomes clear they aren't pushing as aggressively as last game, so it opens up the opportunity for me to take a risk. Normally I wouldn't want to extend past my brawlers over this good flat multipathing terrain, because you become very vulnerable from below. However, no one is pressuring me right now, so the BVR ER shot is on. The opposing flanker notches a couple of times, but I can keep relocking as there is no one pressuring me to give up on the shot. He's also not defending very aggressively, which is quite important when you're going to have to notch an ER, eventually resulting in me picking up the early pick. This is where teamwork and communication are important. Prior to this, one of my teammates had told me I'm overextending, but I explained the pick is on with the ER and can they support me. Once it's confirmed, I immediately start turning cold whilst my team simultaneously covers my retreat. Sabazis and Biscuit down low work together to cut off their grippins from getting underneath. Meanwhile, Supreme starts peppering them with top-down launches. Add to that, their own Hornet is too far away to affect the outcome in time as their two grippins eventually succumb. And this is what I was talking about at the start of this clip. The balance of patience and aggression. In the Fox 3 meta, being overly aggressive can lead to very quick losses, yes, but if you play overly passive on certain maps, you present an opportunity for the other team to take advantage. The lack of pressure in the mid game allows me to take a risk and go for an early pick with the ER, whilst my team moves to cover me and ensure they cannot counter. I eventually get a crit on their last player in the Hornet, and Sab wraps up the round, taking us 2-0 into game 3. Next up is the final game in this round and the final game for this video. We captured C this time as they moved to contest it. They didn't really commit to it however, as we were able to easily ward them off and go back and consolidate our cap advantage. They then looked to try and pincer us this time from either side of the mountain, pushing with 2 on each side. The timing was a bit off however, and we were never really pressured with launchers from both sides, which is what you'd be trying to achieve with a pincer like this. It essentially just resulted in 2 separate 2v2s on either side of the capture points. Me and Supreme both pick up a couple of top-down kills on either side. Biscuit trades with their flanker before Supreme takes out the Hornet last, and we take a 3-0 lead, progressing into the next round. And that will conclude episode 1 of this Air Superiority 2025 series. Following this game was a big one playing against GFRIS, whose air team is also known as Team Hyde. You may recognise that name as they won both the air format in last Thunder Cup and also won last year's Air Superiority, so it promised to be a serious challenge in our qualification journey. I'll be covering that best of 5 in episode 2, so I'll see you all next time for one of the most tense matches I've ever played.